Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. We are ready to start and welcome. Welcome to our virtual avocado field day at Cal Poly. My name is Claire Ballant. I'm the interim director for the Center for Sustainability at Cal Poly. Can everyone hear me? Yes, great. We are recording. I'd like to thank all the organizations that made today's webinar possible. The California Avocado Growers Society, California Avocado Commission, California Department of Food and Agriculture's Healthy Soils Program.
Hello.
And most importantly, thank you to Ben Faber from the UC Ag and Natural Resources, who will be moderating our question and answer today. We have 5 video segments today that we're presenting, and special shout out and thanks to Dr. Moses Mike and his students at the Brock Center for Ag Communications for making these beautiful videos we'll be presenting today. Each is 15 minutes or less, and after each video we will have a brief about 5-minute question and answer session, and we will also have time at the end for more discussion and questions. For your questions, please put them in the chat when you are ready to do so. And if you can, say who the question is for so that we can get the questions to the panelists. They will also be monitoring the chat, so we'll have a free form conversation also within the chat box. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the meeting. And if we cannot get to all the questions, we will post more answers to the questions we didn't get to and email those out to the registrants. Thanks again to all our wonderful presenters. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Ben.
Okay. We have quite a few sponsors for this. We have our foundational sponsors: Delray Avocado, Index Fresh, Mission Produce, Nutrien, Westpac Avocados, Westphalia Fruit, Calavo, and American Ag Credit. And then we have these special event sponsors for today's meeting, which is Yara, Westbridge, Avotopia, Geomara Eco Farms, and CMAR General Engineering, who were instrumental in building the berms that you'll be hearing and seeing about. These videos will be available on the Avocado Society website, and any of your questions that are put into the chat will also be available on the California Avocado Society website. So with that, we will start off with Gabe Philippe and Blake Petrucci talking about how they prune avocados. And listen closely, because you may or may not agree with what he's doing or what they are doing. They've managed the property, the avocado property at Cal Poly for several years now. So with that, we'll turn it over to Gabe and Blake.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben. Are you going to start the video, or did you want us to introduce ourselves?
Well, there you are, Senior Director of California Sourcing and Farming, and Blake's the manager of the Central Coast Farms, and the Mission is managing. Okay.
I just wanted to preface by saying, you know, these are just our opinions. There's a lot of approaches that we didn't cover in this video. A lot of what growers should do is going to be dependent upon their tree size, their tree age, and their financial situation. So you ask 5 different growers, you know, how should I prune? You're going to probably get 5 different opinions. So I just wanted to start with that and be willing to answer additional questions later on.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gabe. And I will go ahead and start the video. Thanks.
My name's Gabe Philippe. I'm Senior Director of California Sourcing and Farming for Mission Produce. We are a global packer shipper, the largest in the world. We have distribution centers around the U.S. and packing houses around the globe. This operation here is a joint venture with Cal Poly State University. It's a long-term partnership that we went into with Cal Poly. It's been a very successful operation. We've managed to sustain yields of around 18,000 pounds per acre here, year in, year out. And I'll let Blake introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Blake Petrucci. I'm the Regional Farm Manager for Mission Produce in San Luis Obispo County. So I manage 3 different ranches, one here in San Luis Obispo and 2 a little bit farther north in Cayucas, totaling about 170 acres. And I manage the day-to-day operations of all the duties that involve our farming practice here.
A lot of growers come to us and ask us, what's the correct way to prune? And usually what we tell them is, just to prune something every year. What we try to do is maintain our tree heights to 80% of the row width. So if we have a 20-foot row, we like the trees to be no taller than 16 foot, roughly. So a lot of times that means we have to prune down to 12 foot, and then the trees regrow to about 16. Yeah, ideally we prune 15 to 20% of the tree's canopy on any given year, and we like to manipulate a different portion of the tree every year. And within our groves, we do a mix of different pruning within certain blocks. So we might take 10% of the grove and thin out the number of trees. So in this case, we're standing next to a tree that was removed about 2 years ago. So we've actually reduced the density from, this was 16 by 20, 16 foot in between the trees, 20 foot in between the rows. We've actually reduced the density from 136 trees to half of that. In older groves, we might choose to thin out or remove every other tree on 10% of the total acreage within a ranch. And then on 40% of the acreage, we might aggressively top the trees. And then on the other 50%, we might remove a quadrant or take out a center limb within the trees. So if we go in and do a variety of different pruning within the grove, the next year we do something totally different. So if we topped a tree the previous year, then we will just remove a limb. If we removed every other tree within a grove, then we'll go in that following year and actually top that section. So every year we're manipulating a different portion of the tree. That's allowing us to mitigate the alternate bearing tendencies of the avocado. It's allowing us to produce budwood on certain trees for 2 years out, produce aggressive budwood. So the trees that we top this year, they're really going to come on heavy 2 years from now. So what we're noticing is by pruning with this strategy, we always have a block within the grove that has 20 to 30,000 pounds per acre on it, and then we'll have other sections that might have 5,000 pounds per acre. The sections that we topped aggressively the previous year will have a light crop the following year, and then the sections where we removed one branch, they might have 10 to 12,000 pounds to the acre on it. So once you sum all of those, the combination of different pruning techniques up, we end up with somewhere close to 18,000 pounds to the acre year in, year out here.
So ultimately we prune to increase our fruit set and our fruit size on each of the trees, whether it's that year or the year after or 2 years out. And that increased fruit set and fruit size comes by way of light penetration all the way through to the floor of the grove. So when we cut out parts of the tree, we're getting more light into each individual tree as well as down to other trees along the base of them, and that's going to allow more flowering to happen on all sides of the tree, which in turn will have a greater fruit set. This also gives us the ability to grow fresh, aggressive budwood, and which in turn will flower the year after, and bring light into trees that are otherwise older or shaded out that can benefit from that rejuvenation of more light, more photosynthesis, more activity.
We also prune to reduce water demand in some cases. If it's a short water year and we need to cut back, then we prune more aggressively to reduce tree demand. We also prune to obviously lower tree heights, so it's cheaper to harvest. And in addition, you're not bringing big ladders into the grove, so you're reducing your liability within the grove also. As Blake mentioned, we prune to increase the surface area. So in a lot of groves, older groves, you see the trees canopy out and all the fruit is at the very top of the tree. When the strong winds come, a lot of that fruit gets blown off. So we like to have layers of fruit on the sides and the center of the tree, so on the tops of the tree all the way around, so that when those strong winds come, the trees actually protect themselves and can keep more of the fruit that they set every year. As far as the costs associated with pruning, the pruning costs can vary dramatically depending on the type of pruning that you're doing and the age of the trees. When the trees are young, you're going to do very minimal pruning, oftentimes just tipping, maybe opening up the center of the tree to make it look like an open vase, but very minimal pruning the first 3 years or so, and the cost is very low for that. So in general, I would say pruning costs can run anywhere from $200 an acre up to $3,000 an acre or more if you're completely removing sections or stumping trees back to 4 to 6 feet tall. That's where it gets costly. But on average, we're probably spending somewhere in the realm of $650 an acre on pruning, doing the variety of different techniques that we have within the grove.
So all of our pruning is done by hand with manual labor. The majority of the work is done with pole saws, which are long chainsaws, to get into some of these trees that are normally bigger. We also utilize some smaller hand chainsaws that can be operated with one hand, as well as manual pole pruners, which use a chain and a blade. But like I said, overall we use pole saws, motorized chainsaws to do the majority of the work. The small saws come in handy for smaller trees, so you have smaller, younger trees and you're removing a center limb that may be down at waist level. It would be a little cumbersome to bring a longer pole saw in that case.
One of the reasons we like to use the mechanical power pruners is because it allows us to do all the work from the ground. We don't have to bring ladders in and have guys with chainsaws up on ladders, so they can reach up 12 foot, no problem with the mechanical power pruner and top the trees. Those pruners can cut trees that are 8 inches in diameter, no problem. So that's the method that we prefer.
For larger cuts, say we are taking a large center limb out of the middle of the tree or a large quadrant, say a 6 or greater inch diameter limb, it's often necessary to undercut the bottom of that limb make multiple incremental cuts starting from the top so as not to rip off and strip a large piece of bark from the tree when that limb comes falling down after the majority of the cut is made. And so that's just common chainsaw practice and good practice for that.
If we had flat terrain and a grove that was opened up, then we would look to mechanical pruning. The only downside to that is a lot of times you're still going in there with manual labor, making additional cuts, and you still have to pull that brush out manually. So it is cheaper to make the initial cuts mechanically, but in the long run, it's the total cost is you're not probably saving much by going mechanically. We like to prune between the months of February through April. By pruning at those times, we're allowing the fruit to be marketed. So at that point, all sizes are released. So we can start in February and pick a tree and cut those branches off and actually market that fruit, which will in turn pay for the pruning practice itself. Another reason we like to prune at that time is it's before the tree's setting fruit, and it's early on in the season, so that if we open a tree up, we're going to get sunlight into the center of the tree to allow budwood creation that season. So if you delay and prune in midsummer, then you're losing that opportunity to create that budwood in the middle of the tree for that year. Another reason why we like to prune February, March, April, I mean ideally it'd be March and April in my opinion, is we've noticed that if your grove is susceptible to frost damage, then the trees that we've pruned in the wintertime get hit harder than the trees that were unpruned or left untouched. So that's another reason why we like to wait until, say, March 15th. In most areas, the frost threat is over with by that time, and we get going. One other practice that is kind of controversial, given that a lot of people are pitching high density groves, we're not opposed to that. We feel that planting high density will get you into max production a couple years earlier versus planting at a more standard density. But a lot of growers, I think, are taking an approach where they're not going the standard 109 tree to the acre density. They're not doing 400 trees to the acre, but maybe they plant somewhere around 200 trees to the acre. And like with this grove, and I think with any grove, if you plant high density in California, given the tools that we have, you need to have it in your plan to remove trees. You know, if you're planting 400 trees to the acre, in my opinion, you're probably going to need to remove some of those trees at about year 5 or 6. If you plant 150 trees to the acre, you might want to start thinking about removing trees year 10 or 12. So that's kind of where this grove stands. We've picked out certain areas, maybe our tightest areas or most canopied areas, and we've started in those sections and have gradually removed about 10% of the grove year by year. And eventually the entire grove will be half the density within the next 5 years to what we planted the trees in 2003. We feel that the benefits of pruning outweigh the risks, so there's always a chance that we can transfer disease such as sun blotch disease from one tree to the next. If we know that we have sun blotch within the groves, then we're sanitizing our equipment in between trees. But all in all, we feel that the benefits of pruning outweigh the risks.
Okay, that was our first video. We did have some questions. Ben, would you like to start addressing some of the questions?
Yeah, we've got time for a few questions. We actually have 2 right now. Ida asks, in any single year, how many combinations of pruning do you do? And how do you know which one is the most effective in productivity?
Well, I think we covered it, but essentially within the grove, we're doing about 3 different types of different prunes. We're topping certain sections, we're removing a limb or a quadrant from certain sections, and then in other areas we might be thinning some trees out. So it's really dependent on the size of your trees and the age of your trees and how big of a problem you have. So a lot of growers, you know, they have orchards that are 25 years old and they come to us and ask the question, their trees are 35 foot tall. And the first thing you have to ask them is, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to try to get fruit at 12 feet? Do you want to slowly bring them down? And depending on what their answer is, I mean, there's different strategies for every grower. So in most cases, the grower will say, yeah, I don't really want to take a huge financial hit in the next 3 years. So we might recommend, you know, just taking 1 or 2 large branches out for 3 years or so. And then on that 4th year, make a final top on the central leader. But yeah, so I guess that somewhat answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Question came up. This whole program is going to be videoed and it will be available on the California Avocado Society website along with the chats. So if you don't catch it this time around, you can review it at your leisure later. So another question, do you leave the cuttings on the ground to compost or do you remove them from the orchard? And how do you decide?
Yeah, we like to leave all the trimmings, all the cuttings on the ground. A lot of the smaller branches, we're just hitting with machetes and chopping it up. And, it's great to cover up the fibrous feeder roots that are real shallow in the soil. The bigger cuts, we'll bring a chipper in and run the branches through the chipper, and everything stays in the grove. We feel that it's advantageous to the trees in the long run.
So if you have a question, we've got another few minutes to go through questions. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll try and answer it. But otherwise, we've got a few questions here. Do you wait to see the flowers before you prune, or is the flower not relevant to your pruning strategy? What would you say your return in dollars and pounds is when you harvest the limb for a prune in February? So do you prune before you see the flowers, or does that mean anything? And
yeah, it's really irrelevant to us. Ideally, you would get your pruning done before the trees were setting, and definitely before the trees flush out. So I mentioned we prune in February through April. We're located in San Luis Obispo County, so our growing season differs from a lot of the growers that are on the call right now. So you guys might actually start a little earlier than us and be okay still, but we would prefer to get the pruning done before that flush comes out, subsequent to the flower.
So here's another question. Have you ever done a spring flush pruning, which would still allow some good bloom time later on? So would you prune spring flush off?
We haven't been, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't or you can't, but we've chosen to just prune once a year, and rather than make a lot of shaping cuts and more tedious smaller cuts, we choose to make larger big cuts that seem to accomplish what we're wanting. We're wanting to bring in light. We're looking to farm light, not a certain number of trees. So making larger cuts seems simpler for us, and it's a little bit cheaper too.
So when you're removing a single limb in February, what's the return, the dollar return on that fruit in February?
Well, you're definitely, the fruit that is being marketed at that time is definitely going to be discounted. Historically, the prices are still low in February, but the biggest hit that the grower takes at that time is usually they don't have the size. But we just have to turn a blind eye to that, and we're confident that by removing that fruit, we're helping produce budwood for future years and future crops. In addition, we're creating better fruit size on the fruit that's remaining.
Okay, they really want to know your secrets. Besides pruning, what other management do you do that you attribute the average 18,000 pounds per acre to?
Well, I mean, we're giving the trees frequent smaller shots of water. All of our groves we've automated, and we've automated not only the irrigation and the valves, but also the fertilizer delivery. So we're also giving them small doses of fertilizer frequently through the growing season, typically March through September or so. They're getting small doses of calcium, nitrogen, potassium, zinc. So I would say, that has a lot to do with it, but just irrigation management is number one, trying to get the right amount of water to your trees at the right time. Avocados are, they're like humans. They like to eat and drink on a frequent basis. So we try not to let the interval go too long in between irrigations. I mean, typically we're irrigating at least every other day. I know that seems very frequent to a lot of people, but we're putting small amounts of water on and trying to keep that top 6-8 inches of soil moist. So I think that's contributed to our success.
And it looks like you're doing very little skirt pruning. Is this mainly because of the wind?
That particular block that we videoed, we did not lift the skirts this year, but that would be another practice that we've failed to mention in the 10-minute clip. But yeah, that if we lifted the skirts, then we would reduce the pruning in another portion of the tree. So that skirt pruning would add to the 15 to 20% that we like to prune on an annual basis, but occasionally we will go and lift the skirts. I don't like lifting them real high off the ground, and that's going to limit potential production. I do like the fact that some of those lower limbs help keep the mulch and the leaf litter in place under the trees. So
that's important. Do you have any problems with invasive shot hole borer up there?
We have not noticed it yet, knock on wood, but we're keeping our eyes out.
Yeah, it's not there. With a young tree, how long do you wait before you take out the central leader to create a base shape?
Usually, I mean, you could probably, it depends on how quickly they grow and your growing region, but I'd say probably by year 3 would be a good time to start selectively taking out branches. And in the first couple of years, we just do minor tipping on the trees.
Yeah. And after the big cut, you come back and manage the regrowth?
That's a good question. I mean, we should, if labor was cheaper and more abundant. And, I guess the other reason why we prune in February, March, especially in SLO County, April, is because that's when there is labor available too. Typically the harvest in that region doesn't get started till later. So we can bring the guys in February and keep them busy for a couple months before they really get into what they want to do, and that's harvest. As far as do we remove water shoots and shape that regrowth? We do not. If I was in another country with cheaper labor, I would definitely be doing it. But like I mentioned, we're trying to make larger cuts in order to bring in broad swaths of light.
So we'll try and answer the rest of these questions at the end of the session. Thank you for putting up with this introduction, Blake and Gabe, and you look good in video. So with that, we're going to move on to David Hedrick, our entomologist from Cal Poly, and he's going to talk to us about pests and scouting. And thank you, Gabe and Blake.
Thank you.
Take it away, Claire.
Well, hi. Welcome to our avocado field day virtually. And we're at the Cal Poly Avocado Orchard that's on Radio Tower Hill that's adjacent to Highway 1. And what we're going to be doing today is focusing on monitoring for arthropod pests, insects, and mites. And there's two things that you're going to be balancing. One is accuracy, and the other one is time. Now, we all know that time equals money, but accuracy means that you need to take some time to make sure that you can find whatever's in these orchards. So you got to be thinking about, okay, what's going to be in there and how do I find it? Because you want to find it. You don't want to be caught by surprise later on. So you've got a couple of things that you can use. One is past history. So if you've got populations in here that you had last year or the year before, go there first, because it's likely that's where they're going to show up again. But you don't want to just rest on your laurels. You also want to take into account new populations that might show up. So you're going to want to think about your orchard and think about the layout of it and kind of divide it up. It's easier to do it that way if you kind of divide and conquer and think about, okay, I need to look at 5 to 10 trees in this area, and I need to look at 5 to 10 trees in that area. But then, if you're thinking about, okay, I've got to look at 10 trees, how long is that going to take? So if you're going to be spending 6 minutes on 10 trees, well, there's an hour out of your day already. So you need to be thinking about, again, that's factoring into that balancing act of time versus accuracy. So if you can go to some place where you know you've had them in the past, you can check and see if they're there again. But then you're going to want to add in additional trees. And some of the places that you want to add in are going to be places like where I'm standing right now. And this is a really excellent spot to check for your two main pests, and that is Persea mite and avocado thrips. And the reason that you want to check in a place like this location is excellent because we're along a dirt road and the prevailing winds are from the northwest, so they're coming this way. And this is also kind of a westerly, southwesterly corner, and as soon as that sun comes around in just a minute, this is going to be lit up and warm. So this is going to be one of the warmest parts of the orchard. So this is going to be a habitat that is perfect for mites because they like it dusty, and that's where you're going to find them. So when you're thinking about adding trees in and sampling for discovery, always look on a roadside or an upwind side of the orchard. It's also going to be good for thrips because this is where the flush is growing and the inflorescence, the flowering is starting to take place. And that's what they're going to be found on. So phenologically, this tree is just ready to go for the two main pests. That doesn't mean you preclude looking on the interior. You do need to go in on the interior and look at those trees too, because there are certain things that are going to be happening there. So you establish this pattern. Okay, I'm going to divide the orchard up and I'm going to look at a few trees. I'm going to go and do that. And when I discover something, then I'm going to return to that. Okay, and from that point on, you're monitoring for population trends. Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they stable? Because that's what's going to drive your decision making on whether you need to treat. But even when you've found what you want to look for and you return to those trees and you're keeping a tabs on that, you do need to add in a few trees every time, new spots, as you're going along to make sure that you're not going to get caught by surprise later on. So what we're going to do now is focus in on some of these major pests. And the first one is Persea mite. And as I mentioned, one of the ways to save time is to go to places where you saw it in previous years. And the way to do that is to look on the older leaves. And what we have here is one of those older leaves. And you can see the typical spotting that takes place when they've been feeding on that underside of that leaf. So you can see it when you turn over the leaf, definite spotting along the veins, but sometimes you can also see it coming through as a yellowing on the top surface of the leaf, and that becomes more evident as the leaf ages or as the feeding becomes more intense. So we know that we had Persea mite here last year. This is last year's leaf. So that means we need to look on newer leaves to see if we've got something going. So we take a leaf that's newer, more recent flush, and turn that over, and we look for that white silvery patch, and sure enough, right now, current, we've got new nests that are forming. Those Persea mites are under there, and they are beginning their feeding process. Of course, you know that once this starts to build up, this leaf is going to sustain maybe enough damage to defoliate. And of course, that's the big issue. We don't want defoliation because then that leads to sunburn, whether it's on the branches or on the fruit. None of that is good for the tree. But there's two other mite species that you could encounter. One is the avocado brown mite, and the other one is six-spotted mite. So with avocado brown mite, that's the species that you can also be monitoring for right now through the spring and into June. And what you'll do for that one is just as you are scouring these trees and looking for the Persea mite, you're going to look on the tops of the leaves for the activity of avocado brown mite. And again, it's a kind of an occasional pest. It's not something that, you know, is typically bothersome, but you do want to keep track of it. Its feeding will also cause defoliation if it gets too out of hand. So it's a way to create efficiencies, kind of one-stop shopping. If you're going to be looking at this tree and you're going to be looking at Persea mite, also at this period of time, you look for avocado brown mite. Now, after June, you're going to keep looking for Persea mite, but then as you get into later summer in August, you're going to want to come in and look for the six-spotted mite. And with six-spotted mite, they're going to be on the undersides of leaves. You're already going to be turning the leaves over looking for the Persea mite populations, and so you're going to look for those six-spotted mites that'll be feeding along the veins in a more diffuse pattern and not the clean spots that you see with the Persea mite. There's really not any good thresholds for mites. A lot of it is what's happened in the past and your gut feeling. It's kind of called a nominal threshold. There's not a formula for you. It's just what's worked in the past. And so you've got other factors coming into play: time of year, how the fruit's coming along, the size of the trees, the health of the trees, and all that stuff, and natural enemies. So you've got beneficial species that are in here that might be feeding on these mites and keeping those populations down for you. You can add predators in, and Galindromus is one of the ones that's commercially available. But what we have as far as an issue, has always been an issue with avocados, is the size of the tree and how do you get even coverage. Now, you're not monitoring at the top of the tree, and you don't really know what's going on there as far as pest populations. You're always down here and assume that what's happening here is also happening up there, vice versa. Nowadays, and this is something that my friend and yours, Ben Faber, might get into one day, and that is the use of drones and drone technology. This is something that we know that they're doing in almond orchards and other cropping systems to get good, even coverage of predatory mites in these hard to reach places. So that's something to keep in mind. But another thing to keep in mind is some new work just came out in a publication last month from David Haviland, entomologist and extension specialist in Kern County. And he was looking for ways to better understand the predators of mites in cropping systems, tree systems specifically. And he found that these yellow sticky cards, you guys are familiar with these, look at that. Yellow and sticky, hence the name yellow sticky card. These can be hung up in trees, and it was shown in this paper, David did a beautiful job on this, that they are differentially attracted to this yellow panel. And the species that he was particularly looking at were the Stethurus spider mite destroyer beetle and six-spotted thrips. Not six-spotted mite, but six-spotted thrips. Those are both predators of mites. And if you talk about efficiency, trying to balance time and accuracy, if you can have the bugs come to you, that is way more efficient than you having to go find them. And so this is new technology. It's not new technology, it's a new application of old technology. And I would be looking for new information coming out from the Cooperative Extension on the use of these traps and how to look for those numbers and what's going to be a good balance in terms of helping you decide whether you need to treat or not. All right, so there's a couple of miscellaneous caterpillars that you might be worried about in your area. One is going to be the Amorbia leaf rolling type. And with leaf rollers, again, when you're doing your monitoring, you're scouting, you're looking at the canopy, you're going to want to look for leaves that are flat and tied together. Pull those apart and you're going to see that Amorbia in there feeding on the leaf tissue. The other one is the omnivorous looper, not the omnivorous leaf roller, but the omnivorous looper, different family. And they're going to be feeding on the margins of leaves. And so that's going to be something like what we see here. That's kind of damage that they will do. It's leaf damage. Yes, sometimes they can feed incidentally on fruit, but it's mainly leaf damage. And if you are going to be looking for the leaf roller, you look for those leaves that are tied together. But if you're going to be looking for the omnivorous looper, you're going to need to use another method, and that's this tap method. And it consists of some really technical type tools here. You got a white plate and some sort of a stick device. Now this is a tube that I got at the Staley's Ranch a couple of years ago. So you know this is super high tech. This is the best kind of tube you can get. So thank you, Staley's. Now, you just come along, you put the white plate underneath what you want to tap, and you just strike hard, and it dislodges them. They land, and you can see what's there. There's some calculations that you can do. You can do 20 trees, do the tap on 20 trees, and if you get X number of larvae, that will tell you whether you need to treat or not. Now, most of the treatments can be pretty benign. You can put on BT or something like that. Again, this is miscellaneous. It's it's where you're just keeping track of it. Very rarely do you have to do anything about it, but just to raise awareness. And the tap method could also be something useful for thrips. And if you have an inflorescence and it's a lot of surface area to look at, you can take that inflorescence and strike it and dislodge the thrips. And that gives you a really easy way to see the different kinds of thrips, whether they're predators, if there's predatory mites, if there's lacewing larvae, and if you've got avocado thrips versus western flower thrips, because that western flower thrips on this white plate doing that little flutter dance, super easy to pick up and see.
Okay, Dave, thank you very much. You were going to show us a handout that you got?
Yeah, there's a handout that I put together if scouting and trying to look around an orchard for insect pests is new or something that you're not sure about how to start the process. I put together a handout. I guess Claire, maybe you've got that on the screen, and that'll be available through the website too. And basically, it's just, avocados are grown in such different places, and some of them are on hilly areas, like we just saw with the Mission avocado. Some are flat, and you really just need to look at the orchard, determine that scouting is something that you need to do, and of course, there's a long list of benefits to monitoring and keeping track. But the key things are not getting surprised, knowing what's out there, being able to make proper decisions so that you're not responding or reflexively trying to put out large fires, but taking things a little bit more one step at a time. And that's the big benefit of monitoring. It saves you money in the long run. So map your orchard. One of the things that I'm really trying to get people to use, I know it's pretty prevalent, but just making sure everybody's using mapping apps. There's some general ones out there like Agrian, but get some kind of mapping device on your tablet, on your phone, so that you can keep track. So down at the bottom there, bottom right-hand corner, there's an image of what it looks like if you're using the Agrian app on your phone. And you really need to look at the orchard setting. Here I've got two examples. One, it's hilly, and one, it's flat. Divide it up and just start picking places to examine trees. And Ben and I were chatting earlier, and it's like the obvious first place you got to start is on those upwind sides, especially along dirt roads, because the main pests that you're going to have, these mites and thrips and stuff, they come in on the wind, they blow in, and so they're going to hit that upwind side of those trees first. But guess what? So are the natural enemies. And so that's where you really can understand what the dynamics are that are going on. But as I said before, you got to get in and check out what's going on in the interior too, so that you're not caught unawares by pests that may be building in those orchards.
Okay, here's the classic question. What treatments do you use to get rid of mites, and how do you apply?
Yes, I know.
I know. Kill.
Kill. Spray. So look, the thing is that nowadays we have so many different growing philosophies that you kind of have to figure out where you are on the spectrum. Are you going to be full chemical, or are you going to be full biological? And the reality is you're never going to be one way or the other, because you're going to slide up and down that scale depending on what's going on that year, depending on what's going on in the orchard, what's going on marketing wise, and so you will end up moving up and down that scale pretty consistently year in and year out. So one of the things that you do need to know is how natural enemies are coming into play. And the natural enemies are there doing the work for you. Many of them are doing it for free of charge. And but there are some commercially available natural enemies like the Gallindromus or the Neoselius that are the predatory mites. Now those guys you can pay to put in, and that's good. And if you're going to be paying, you need to know what natural enemies are already there and what needs to go in on top of that. Are there formulae for that? No, that is a learned through experience kind of an approach. Now, in terms of chemicals, you got to go sort of looking at the agrimec type of an approach. The guidelines are there to provide just a series of different kinds of chemical approaches. Some are incredibly harsh and some are a little bit more environmentally friendly. Some involve oils, other things. So you have to look at the spectrum of chemical approaches and decide if that is going to be economical for you, and realize that a lot of those chemical approaches are going to be harmful to the beneficials that are already there. And then prepare, like if you're going to go in and just do like a scorched earth thing, okay, then it's going to take time for those beneficials, the naturally occurring ones and the ones that you purchase, to get back on track and providing that population regulation that you want. Beneficials do their best work when the populations of the pests or the prey that they're after are low. That is a given, okay? And so as long as you're maintaining these low numbers, that's fine. If something gets out of control and you have a really big blow up, okay, well, then you may need to come in with something stronger to get the numbers back down. So then subsequently, the natural enemies can maintain those pest populations at those lower densities. So there is no strict, easy rule. There is no, just recipe for success. The only way that you can really get a handle on it is by monitoring, keeping track of what you did last year and the year before to inform what you're going to do going forward. It's all based on, did that work last time? Okay, let's try that again. Did it work the time before? No. How do you develop a threshold? I see that come up in the chat. Okay, so nominal thresholds are basically gut instinct or based on what you have learned from previous experience. And so you will, if you have done a good job in keeping track of your pest population densities and the relative numbers of the pest populations and the natural enemies and the ratios there, and you've seen how much of a pest population you can handle density wise and not have any effect on your bottom line, that's your threshold. But you have to have those numbers. Well, when we went out and monitored, it was like 8 leaves out of 10 had Persea mite, but gosh, we didn't have any defoliation because it wasn't intense enough, and we didn't have any sunburn. And so there was no economic downside to that. All right, that's a strong data point that informs basically a threshold for you.
Thank you, David. So you'll be around at the end, right, to answer some more questions?
I'm here.
They're building. So thanks, and we're going on to Johnny Rosecrans, who's the farm manager at Cal Poly, to talk about how do you build a berm. Take it, Johnny.
Hi everyone, my name is Johnny Rosecrans and I work at Cal Poly in the Horticulture and Crop Science Department. We have over 110 acres of ag land, 80 of which are orchard crops. We have a unique mix of citrus and avocado varieties, stone and pome fruit, and next year we plan to plant nut crops as well. My main responsibility is to oversee the day-to-day operations around the farm, with my focus being on orchard crops. which is why I'm here today, because I was asked to talk about berming. And since we recently replanted this 3.5 acres of avocados on berms, here I am today virtually to show you how we accomplished this. So a little bit of backstory behind this block. 3 or 4 years ago, we started seeing significant decline in these trees, and upon further investigation, I did some soil sampling, and sure enough, it was positive for Phytophthora root rot. I did some additional potholing in this block, and believe it or not, 12 to 14 inches down, I found bedrock or hard pan. So this poor block was slowly starting to suffocate because the water couldn't move beyond that hard pan. And so even further more, I started asking around, and this block was never deep ripped prior to planting. So you can kind of see the long-term effects of what happens if you don't deep rip and you're growing in a hard pan layer. It just turned out bad for this poor block. So we started having discussions with Tim Spann, with the CAC, and Professor Dr. Garner, and Tim Spann offered up the idea of replanting this block as the 5th and northernmost block for UC Riverside's root rot resistant trial. So we were all on board with that. We thought it'd be a great opportunity to do some research in this block. So we decided, yeah, let's pull the trigger on that. And so we all collaborated together, and last year we ended up planting this block as the part of that root rot resistant trial. But I am not here today to talk about the trial. I was asked to talk about how we replanted this block with an emphasis on berming and what it took to accomplish this and the steps required to do so. So let's take a look at how we accomplished this. And just a quick disclaimer, I unfortunately didn't capture video or pictures of the entire process start to finish of this planting and berming and all that. So some of the videos and or pictures that I show in this presentation are from other projects, but I'm using them because it's the same equipment that we use, and so that'll give you the gist of how we got things accomplished.
The first step was an obvious one. We had to remove the existing trees before any of the land prep could begin. This was accomplished by using a D8 dozer, which allowed for quick work by pushing over each tree. The trees were then ground up using this excavator with a thumb attachment, and this massive horizontal grinder made quick work of things. Within hours, our poor orchard was nothing but wood chips. After spreading the wood chips around the field as best we could, it was then time to deep rip. Using the same D8 bulldozer with a 4-foot shank on the rear, the entire 3.5 acres was ripped. The field was ripped lengthwise and then cross-cut at a 45-degree angle. And remember, this block had a hard pan layer 12 to 14 inches down in areas, so deep ripping this block was crucial to breaking up that layer. Our next task was to break up the larger clods of soil created by the ripping process and smooth out the soil, so we decided to make several passes with the disc. It was finally time to start the berming process. We used a lister bar with 2 plows set at 20 feet apart to mark lines where each berm would be created. This tractor was outfitted with a GPS unit to keep the lines perfectly straight. Unlike the previous planting that was bermed cutting across the slope or horizontal to the downward slope of the hill, we decided for this planting we would berm the block parallel with the slope to promote a faster draining environment. Once the lines were cut, the real work began. A D6 cat with a 6-way blade slowly started pushing soil into rows. After several passes on each side, the long lines of soil started to resemble berms. For the final and finishing touches, we used a motor grader to flatten the tops of each berm and a pole scraper to smooth out the drive rows. We were pretty happy with how the berms turned out, and we ended up planting this block in June of 2020. Here are some of the photos.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation on how we replanted this block with the emphasis on berming. Again, my name is Johnny Rosecrans. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
So Johnny, what did it cost to build those berms?
I did the math, besides tree removal. So just the deep ripping, the disking I did myself, but I actually incorporated in the cost of the quote, the disking and the layout and mounting it. It was anywhere from about $4,500 to $5,000 per acre.
Okay. Question, I mean, this is it. What are the benefits of berming? Why do it?
Well, we really wanted to berm to promote faster drainage in the avocados. This particular block, the previous block had Phytophthora root rot. The berms were going cross or horizontal with the slope, and we were encountering kind of a shallow with the hard pan, the water just wasn't penetrating, and so we deep ripped and decided to berm them parallel with the slope just to promote some faster draining soil.
So here's another good question. Are there guidelines for the steepness of the slope for berming? Is there a point at which it's not valuable to do it?
I don't know if I have that answer. You might be able to answer that better, Ben.
Okay, I don't like to do this because basically on flat ground you can do this. You can afford this machinery. And number two, when you're on a slope, you do have good drainage typically. And you have control over water, okay? It's how you put it on, the frequency and that sort of thing. So generally speaking, when you're on a slope, you're controlling the water and you should have fairly good drainage. So the benefit of berms kind of falls apart once you get above about a 15 to 20% slope. And then it just gets too expensive to do. Although when you go to Chile, you see them berming these incredible mountains. Is there any research on the yield benefits of berming? So if you compare yield, pre-berming and yield going into the future, what do you expect to see in the yield effects?
Again, that's something I'll be honest with, and I don't know that I have that answer. This particular block is going to be a 10 to 20 year study, and it's a root rot trial that you guys will hear about after me. But some of those answers might be, or some of those questions might be answered, looking 5-10 years into the future. I apologize. I don't think I have that information.
Really, it becomes a question of root health and tree health. And if you don't have good drainage, you've got a poor soil. Berming is the only way to go if you're going to grow avocados, and for that matter, citrus as well. So, it's almost a question of, do you have trees or don't have trees? So what's the economic benefit of a berm? Well, it's really important. So how can we build a simple berm in a smaller area than 3 acres? What if you have a berm? What if you have quarter of an acre? There's some simple way.
I mean, so the technique still would apply to smaller acreage. You might just be using smaller equipment. The outfit that we used has quite large equipment, and so they brought in, you know, the big guns. But you could easily berm smaller acreage with just a smaller tractor if you can.
Yeah. And so here's another question: why build berms with steep sides rather than a more gradual chevron shape in the orchard? It's hard on poor pickers like me.
What was the question, Ben?
Why are they so steep? Why are the berms so big?
On this particular planting?
Correct.
We just kind of discussed it with the contractor and decided to push them up. We know there's going to be some soil settling, so you know, there's going to be a little bit of you know, ladder work if once the trees get taller. But you know, we see that in some of our larger orchards, anyways.
Yeah. So how are you going to protect these berms from erosion? You've got cover cropping in between. What are you
I do.
Sides?
Yeah, I planted a cover crop. It was a forage mix. It was a mix of barley, oat, and wheat. And so, I mean, I wish we had more rainfall to test our runoff, but we did get that one storm that produced 5 to 6 inches, and the entire area held up really well. I was happy to see that there was minimum erosion. We did install some drain inlets that captures some of the water and moves it off site. We have the unfortunate thing where the highway drains right into our orchard. So we're able to capture that water and move it off site. But between the drain inlets and the cover crop, I was pretty happy with how the orchard held up, seeing very minimal erosion.
Yeah, it is surprising. Did you consider ripping down the middle of the berms after you built them in order to improve drainage in between berms?
No, I did not. I mean, that soil was bermed up and it was pretty fluffy, if you will. And so I didn't feel that there's a need to put a rip down the center.
Is there a width to height ratio of a berm? Is there a dimension you want to?
Man, all these tough questions. I don't know. It's really your own design, right? And what you're thinking of. I've seen smaller berms, I've seen wider berms, but keep in mind kind of what your ultimate tree shape is going to be, and you know, design it to that.
So here is two questions, here's the same question from two people. What about mounding versus berming? Why a continuous berm versus an individual mound per tree?
You know, I think a continual berm just kind of sets up the orchard a little bit better. I don't know, maybe you can manage it a little easier than just creating, you know, one mound per tree. You know, with using a tractor, it's easier to push soil up and berm it in a line than berming it in a circle.
Yeah, it really is, it lends itself to machine creation, and it's a whole lot cheaper than individual mounds. You also create a much larger volume of soil for the roots. Remember, avocados are shallow rooted, and if you're just, you know, putting those roots into a little mound, when they first started doing this elevated planting back when George Goodall and Bob Burns and a bunch of people were doing it, it'd blow over because there wasn't enough rooting in the mounds. Whereas with the continuous berms, you've got much more volume of soil for the roots to be in. are the dimensions dictated by the need to mow in between? So is your mower designed?
I did keep that in mind somewhat. The drive row is about 8 to 9 feet wide. And I have 2 different mowers that will work. I haven't mowed the cover crop yet. So that's certainly a consideration when designing your berms. Is how your tractor is going to fit down there, and what width you have for your tractors and your mowers and implements and all that.
Did the $4,500 per acre include the removal of the old trees? Were you worried about using the root rot trees as mulch?
Well, it was designed to be a Phytophthora root rot trial. You're going to hear about it in the next talk with Dr. Garner. So we actually wanted the pathogen to stay in the soil. So, you know, most times you're not going to want that. But in this case, we did want the pathogen.
Yeah, the researchers are terrible. What type of irrigation emitters are you using on the new trees?
Yeah, so I have 3 drip emitters per tree. They're a half a gallon piece. And I plan to slowly convert them to a micro sprinkler down the road.
Is there any concern about the trees settling below grade once, you know, the berm soil settles, which would cause some problems with crown rot?
Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. The soil is settling. The tree might settle a little bit, but I would hope they'd kind of settle together. As of today, I haven't noticed any trees settling any deeper than what the berms have been doing.
Okay. And did you apply gypsum?
I did not.
Good. Probably didn't need to. So with that, Johnny Rosecrans, thank you very much. And you'll be around to answer questions at the end, I hope.
Sure. I'm
okay.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Lauren Garner. Dr. Lauren Garner is a horticultural teacher at Cal Poly, and she's been working closely with avocados for years, and she's going to talk to us about the avocado root rot trial that is at Cal Poly now.
Hi, this is Lauren Garner at Cal Poly, and we are here at our rootstock trial that we are running with Patty, Mary Lou, and Peggy from UC Riverside. And so this is one of multiple sites where we are looking at the effects of these different rootstocks on Hass avocado trees. So San Luis Obispo here is our northernmost site that we have going. These trees were planted just last year, and so they've been getting well established. The major goal of this trial is to try to take a close look at these rootstocks that are already known to provide, to most likely provide resistance to Phytophthora. And so, as the majority of you already know, that pathogen is one that is a huge problem for avocado growers throughout the world. We have a large number of tools in our toolbox that help us to try to deal with root rot, from preventing it, some methods of chemical control, control of irrigation, at trying to make sure that the roots don't stay too wet and the tree becomes more likely to be infected, or we've provided an environment that really allows the pathogen to grow well or to spread easily through an orchard. And then we've had in our industry a relative relatively long history of being able to use rootstock that are resistant to Phytophthora, but that resistance is somewhat limited, and so there's been an additional long history of avocado rootstock development and breeding at UC Riverside, and so they now have several rootstock that they're hoping will soon be available for commercial licensing and use by our industry. And so one of the things that we are doing here is we have 3 of those rootstock, and we have DUSA, which is one of our industry standard rootstocks. They've all been grafted over to Hass avocado, and so we have them here in this orchard so that we can evaluate not just their potential resistance to Phytophthora, but also the effects, any effects that these rootstock might have on Hass avocado, whether those effects be positive or negative. And so we've had, like I mentioned, we have these trees in, they got planted last summer. We did our first evaluation of the trees approximately 2 months later in August, and just last week we did a second evaluation of these trees so that we now have data on their height, the trunk diameter, and also their general overall health. For the rootstock that we are evaluating, though the primary objective of the study is to confirm that they are indeed resistant to Phytophthora, there are a lot of other potential benefits that these rootstocks could have. And so we have evaluated our trees for issues such as tip burn due to salinity, heat damage that could occur, how much they are flushing, how much bloom is actually being produced. It's obviously too early to be evaluating them for yield, but we are very excited that we've already been able to find a few differences between the different rootstock. And so one of the things that we have been able to find is that we've got one of these new rootstock has actually resulted in trees that are taller than those that are on the DUSA rootstock. We also were able to find a significant effect on perseamite damage to some of our trees, so we're interested in continuing to take a look at that. We are fortunate to have very good water up here, so the trees that are at this particular orchard aren't really being challenged with respect to salinity, but I know that at some of the other sites that is being evaluated and some differences in salinity tolerance have already been detected. And we did actually, unfortunately, have them challenged by heat. We reached 120 degrees on one of our thermometers here on campus during the last summer, and that's an awful lot for, well, everybody, but also for the avocado trees themselves. But fortunately, we had very little heat damage, and so far, based on our analysis, we haven't seen a difference that's related to rootstock. We've also been very fortunate with respect to mortality. The trees have all survived the initial planting, and we were fortunate enough to get really good deer fencing up around the entire orchard so that we haven't lost any just due to normal attrition. One of the other things that could be very exciting for us is if any of these rootstock actually allow the trees to be just healthier and more vigorous in general. I'm sure that the majority of you have already heard about laurel wilt disease, and though we are fortunate to not have it in the state of California at this point, we do have to anticipate that it might get here, along with the beetles that actually carry it and could cause avocado trees to get laurel wilt disease. And it's been found that trees that are healthier are much less likely to be fed on by the beetle and therefore less likely to get laurel wilt disease. So though we hope to not have these trees challenged by that particular beetle and disease, we do feel that it could be helpful to the industry if we are able to find anything that would indicate that any of these rootstock might enable the trees to just be healthier and resist more any other pest pressures that might be coming our way. So this land has actually been in avocados for a long period of time. And so since we've been managing this area, we found that we had a section that, unbeknownst to us previously, was just much more shallow than we thought it was and not draining as well as we thought it was. And so when the trees began to wilt, we mistakenly thought that they were in need of more water, and what had actually happened is that the trees had become stressed due to the land being much more shallow, and they had it became obvious to us a little later on, that Phytophthora had started to become a factor in the tree's health. Before we were able to correct that, we had one of the more wet, rainy seasons in recent history, and so the Phytophthora that had been partway up this hill spread very quickly down the hillside during that rainy period. As it turned out, we ended up meeting up, Johnny Rosecrans and I ended up chatting with Tim Spann and Ben Faber at one of the last California Avocado Commission and Avocado Society meetings to be held on Cal Poly's campus. And so I still remember asking Tim Spann, hey, do you happen to be doing any Phytophthora rootstock trials? And he asked me if I could use several hundred trees. And so it turns out that this was just a really fortuitous setup. It's not a whole lot of, in fact, I assume it's no growers are actually happy to find out that their trees have Phytophthora, but there's really no better place to actually test Phytophthora resistant rootstock than in an area that's known to have a history of Phytophthora. In order to know that these trees are resistant, we really do have to know that eventually they're going to be challenged with the pathogen itself. And so we were, as I know that Johnny Rosecrans has explained, the orchard got put in this same area, not just because we needed to replace the trees, but because it was just a really excellent win-win. At our site here, we are actually fortunate that we were able to set up this orchard in a way that is both commercially appropriate in terms of the spacing of the trees, the way that they're put up on berms, the way they're being irrigated, and also that we have the trees in rows based on which rootstock they are. So the trees are in groups of 8, 9, or 10 trees, all of the same rootstock in a row, so that even as this orchard gets older and the trees might start to root graft with one another, we will still be able to detect effects of the different rootstock on yield and other aspects of growth. And so we're fortunate that we were able to set this up in a way that's both very statistically robust so that we can get good data to report back to the industry, but that it's also commercially applicable, that we're not looking at one tree of one on one rootstock next to another tree on another rootstock, where where we might have different confounding factors occurring. So what we do have out here is nearly 400 trees that are in here. The trees that we're able to take data off of that are on the 3 rootstock that we are testing against DUSA are also being, we also have additional trees that were donated by C&M Nursery that are available so that we don't have, say, unused space or gaps within a row or between rows, so that again our results are hopefully going to be fully commercially applicable and useful to our industry. And so that's one of the things that we hope will make this project as useful to the industry as quickly as it possibly can be.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Let's see, I just lost my, I just lost my screen.
I can see the Q&A if you'd like me to
Yeah,
check that out for now.
Please jump in.
Gotcha. So I see a question asking what are the rootstocks being used, and so they have these very fancy names like PP35 and things like that. So our control is DUSA, so a really common rootstock that's being used in industry, but the 3 other rootstocks are currently they're just named in a way that's, you know, useful to the folks at, like, to me and to the folks at UC Riverside and to the folks at Nursery who grafted these trees. And so, but if anybody does happen to be familiar with these studies, we have PP 35, 40, and 45. So they're 3 of the what seem to be some of the more promising rootstock for Phytophthora resistance, and they're also, of all of the other sites that are currently studying these rootstocks that have these kind of similar trials in place. These 3 rootstock cultivars seem to be at all of those sites, so we should be able to make really good comparisons. Ben, did you change your way there?
Why not mulch these new trees? Why not mulch the berms?
Got it. So some of that might be to Johnny to answer some of that question, but I would agree with Johnny that the berms seem to be holding up really nicely at this point, and where we don't actually see a need for mulching. If we did want to mulch them, we would have to do so with a lot of care, like to make sure that the mulch didn't end up like at the base of the tree or anything like that. I know that part of our assumption is that we'll get part of the benefit that most avocado growers do, that the leaves are going to end up providing us with a nice leaf layer and on the top of the berms. But I think if we were to find that because of the berm height or the wind or something like that, that the leaves really aren't going to do the job, then I'm sure it's something we might consider to try to keep our evaporative losses down from that area. Johnny, does that sound about right to you also?
Couldn't have said it any better.
Yeah.
We have tried to mulch certain blocks. In fact, that lower block that was dying from Phytophthora, we tried to mulch it. And I mean, it's a lot of work. One, you got to secure the wood mulch, and then there's quite a bit of labor involved in either wheelbarrowing or you know, using a loader to dump, you know, buckets of mulch onto the area. So there's a lot of labor involved.
So how are you going to control the weeds on the berm?
You're looking
Life
at.
is
Well, I actually have gone through there several times with a little gator sprayer that I use. I was petrified because I didn't want to kill any of any trees and have to give the bad news to Dr. Garner or anyone involved. So I was very, very cautious about spraying. But we have brought in a labor crew to hand weed, and we plan to bring in additional labor crews to do so. I think Dr. Garner has secured some funding through her grants to bring in some labor just to hand weed around them.
Yeah, and I would also say that the cover, I realized the question was more about the berms on the berms themselves, but the cover crop is really doing a nice job suppressing the weeds between the rows also. So I think that by working diligently to keep the weed pressure down early in the growth of the trees until we get a nice canopy cover on those berms, I think that's going to pay off for us in terms of being able to make sure that we know that we're not hopefully not really having any kind of increase in like the weed seed bank that we might already have, and that we'll be able to again make use of the canopy cover on the berms and the cover crops between the rows to really help keep the weed pressure down as much as possible.
So this is for both of you. For staking the trees, why use PVC rather than a wooden stake?
I think the wind on that hill was a major factor. We had other stakes, but we were concerned about just the mechanical damage that would come from the trees rubbing against like wooden or metal stakes, and that PVC has worked well for us previously. And Johnny, was there any other aspect to that other than PVC not being the like most difficult thing for us to actually get staked in?
Well, you can see what a professional speaker, she could articulate much better than I can. But for me, I believe I was asking around, and Josh Garner with Mission, I was asking him, and he said, I use PVC. And so we decided to use PVC, but Dr. Garner's answer sounds a lot better.
It also builds a stronger trunk too.
And Johnny is also being he's being very gracious about that, because before we changed out the stakes, we were looking at the trees and noticing that there was definitely some issues with like they did need the support, that's for sure. And you can see even with the staking that they're still getting a good bit of wind out there and a good bit of movement, which, as Ben points out, if you can get them staked so that they'll still move a little bit, then you can get a really strong trunk. If you stake them too tightly and the trees don't get to move around very much, then you don't get as strong a trunk growth that you're going to really want in place later on in the life of the orchard.
Okay, you two will be around at the end, I take it. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Johnny. And we're going to move on to Charlotte DeCock, who's a soil scientist at Cal Poly, and she'll be talking about soil health and cover cropping and all those good things.
Hi, I'm Charlotte DeCock. I'm a professor in soil health and fertility at Cal Poly and a certified crop advisor. Last year, we started a project to study the effect of cover crops on soil health in orchards. This project includes 2 field trials, one out in Etna Valley and one here on our Cal Poly campus. In the field trial in Etna Valley, we have 3 treatments. We have the control treatment, which is the typical practice where the alleys in between the trees are left fallow, so there's bare soil. In the two other treatments, we're testing different variations of cover crop management. In one of them, we have a triticale cover crop, so a non-legume cover crop. In the other one, we have that same triticale with an inoculation of mycorrhizae. So that's out in Etna Valley. Here at Cal Poly, we have also 3 treatments, but they're a little bit different. We have similarly the control with the bare fallow. We have a treatment with the triticale, which we're standing in right now. But then the third treatment is a cover crop mix that includes legumes. So in that treatment, we have 10% of triticale and then a mix of 3 different legumes. We have faba bean, field pea, and common vetch in there. All right. So as I said, we're standing here in the treatment with the triticale cover crop, and one of the things you can see here on the ground is the mulch. So the common practice in this orchard is to prune in fall and then mulch all these prunings and just leave them on the surface. This has been really nice for this orchard because we're on a salinas silty clay loam soil here, and after it rains, the soil can get really muddy. The mulch helps with accessibility to this orchard after heavy rains. So we didn't really want to disc in that mulch to be able to prepare a seed bed for the cover crop, and this year we tried if we could just seed that cover crop directly into this mulch. You can see that the cover crop has nicely germinated, so we're really happy to be able to verify that we can seed that cover crop directly into that mulch instead of having to disc it into the ground, adding that additional disturbance and lowering the accessibility to the field because it gets really muddy. We're here in a different plot of the same triticale cover crop treatment, and you can see that it looks a little bit different here than it did in the previous crop. What we see here is a lot more dense coverage of the soil by that cover crop. And this is caused by actually germination of some of the seed from last year's cover crop. So we could see in the previous plot how that cover crop was nicely growing in these straight lines, which is a result of how we seeded that cover crop with a drill seeder that puts the seed in these nice lines. Here we see that the plants are much more scrambled. So that seed that was produced last year was basically germinating. So this is an interesting observation because it provides opportunities for growers to potentially let their cover crop purposefully go into seed so that you don't have to reseed and buy seed every year. One thing to pay attention to though is that with crops that are frost sensitive, you don't want your cover crop to be too tall when there's frost at night because that tall cover crop can increase the risk for frost damage. So here you see an example of a legume cover crop mix that's thriving. This is what we would hope the cover crop treatment with the legumes to look like in the lemon grove. So as we continue improving soil, hopefully this is where we can get in a few years from here. So here we're standing in front of one of these newer orchards on our campus. I'm standing in front of an olive grove, and you can see that the cover crop in this olive grove is doing a lot better than the cover crop out in the lemon orchard. Before this olive grove was put in, they had the field fallow for a little bit, but it was a green fallow. They put in a cover crop that served as a soil builder with a lot of legumes, a lot of good roots. And you can clearly see that when you start with better soil health, your cover crop is also going to do better. When it comes to avocados, there's definitely also opportunity to use cover crops to improve your soil health. When you're talking about a mature orchard with a very dense canopy, you're probably not going to be able to get a cover crop in there because there's not going to be enough light coming through the canopy for that cover crop to be able to succeed. In these mature orchards though, you get all that leaf material that comes onto the soil, and this is actually a really good source to build your soil organic matter. Where the cover crops can play a role is in the younger orchards where the canopy hasn't completely closed in yet. And here on campus, we just put in this new avocado grove on a hill And there's a cover crop growing, and that cover crop has already been doing a really good job at keeping the soil in place and preventing erosion in this young orchard with these very heavy rains we've had a few weeks ago. We are just in our second year of this research project right now. We're collecting a lot of data on different soil properties, also on the trees. We're collecting yield data. We are in the process of analyzing all that data, and we will definitely make that available to you as soon as we have it. I would love to hear from you. If you have questions about cover crops, if you have certain experiences you would like to share, if you have comments on the video, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email is popping up on the bottom of the screen, and so I am really excited to hear from you.
So thank you, Charlotte. You have a handout that you wanted to discuss, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so the video mostly shows what the cover crop looks like in the different orchards really on campus, with a highlight on the research trial where we have the statistically sound replication of treatments where we can really assess what impact that cover crop is going to have. I also made a handout that will be available to you later with a little bit more on the benefits of cover crops. So many of you might be familiar with many of these benefits. So that cover crop is going to put organic matter in the soil and then help with improving the soil structure. So that helps with infiltration. It holds your soil in place after a heavy rain. And it doesn't only help with infiltration and draining that soil better, but better soil structure also helps with holding on to more water. So you can build the capacity of your soil to be able to hold on to that water. And really, I think cover crops are a really good way to improve the health of your soil. Soils are happiest when there's plants growing in them. On the nutrient side, the cover crops can also help out. If you, of course, put a legume in there, you're going to add some nitrogen from biological nitrogen fixation. On the other hand, if you have a cereal cover crop, that cover crop is going to be able to scavenge and take up some of your residual nitrogen maybe, and so prevent that nitrogen to go into the surface waters or the groundwater. So there's a lot of different potential benefits of cover crops, and depending on the type of a cover crop you plant, some of these benefits are going to be expressed more than others. So selecting what cover crop you want to grow is an important step in choosing to do cover cropping. And so this fact sheet was put together based on much of what we have experienced growing these cover crops at Cal Poly right now, but also based on advice and recommendations we've received from Ben Faber during the process of starting this project, as well as recommendations from Valerie Bullard at the Plant Materials Center in Lockford, where they are testing a lot of different types of cover crop species. And so for avocados, Ben recommended to really choose something that's not going to grow too tall, especially in the context of risk for wildfires. So there's a few recommendations there: a brome, a Zora fescue, or a bird clover, or 3 good options for avocados, especially in the context of the risk for wildflowers. And then there's some more recommendations on that fact sheet. In addition, there's also a number of links to resources from the NRCS. There's some really good guides and databases of all kinds of different cover crop species based on the hardiness zone you're in and based on the different kinds of benefits they can bring. And I plugged these links in there. In addition, there's also links to the website of the Healthy Soils program. So this is a program by the CDFA that funded this research project, but there's also a portion of that program that's called the incentives program that supports basically grants for growers to plant cover crops. So that might be an interesting option to look into. And then there's a link to the NRCS EQIP, which is another program by the NRCS to get financial support to start cover cropping.
Okay, here's a question for you. When you have a dry winter or erratic rainfall in the fall, how do you get the cover crops to germinate?
Oh, that's a great question. And so we started this this project 2 years ago, and we have had 2 really dry winters. And I see Johnny smiling, and he probably is thinking about, you know, how I was kind of stressed out to get this project going and not being sure if this cover crop was going to grow or not. So in both these years, the cover crop has come up even with the erratic winters. We have waited. So some people seed the cover crop in the dry soil. We have waited until after the first rain because it's a little bit easier to get that seed deeper in the soil with the drill seeder. And so in both years, we have waited until right after the first rain to put it in. In other orchards on campus, Johnny has put it in before the first rain, just in the dry soil. And on all the orchards on campus, the cover crops seem to be coming up. And I think Johnny can probably elaborate a little bit more because he's been cover cropping for a long time on campus and probably gone through a lot of different weather patterns.
Yeah, it's, excuse me, it's been difficult the last 2 years, the driest 2 years that we've seen back to back, I think, in recent history. In an ideal world, as Dr. DeCock mentioned, we would get, you know, a 1/4 inch of rain in October, and then we would prep the soil, maybe do a little disking, and kind of fluff that soil up, and then you can seed it after that. And in which case, you know, you'd hope for another rain shortly thereafter to germinate the seed. But the last few years, yeah, we've put in cover crop seed in November, and it just sat there, you know, for 2 or 3 weeks. You know, and I didn't know whether the seed was going to germinate, but we've had pretty good results seeing germination even, you know, 3 weeks with no rain.
Are you monitoring soil moisture content to see the impact of the cover crop? And there's been observations that there is increased water holding capacity with the cover crop. And then you have the competition from just evapotranspiration with the cover crop. So is there an idea of, does it add or subtract from the water that would be available for the avocados?
Yeah, in this particular trial, we're not monitoring moisture, but we're hoping to be able to do that in the future. Let's see, when you look at sort of research that has been published, it goes a little bit both ways. Some of them see lower moisture content under the cover crop. Some of them see the other trends. So the data seems to be a little bit all over the place when it comes to research data, but I think the water holding capacity is a different metric than soil moisture. The water holding capacity is how much water soil can hold on to if you completely soak it and you see how much water is left. The moisture content at any given time is a combination of the water holding capacity in combination with the evapotranspiration, right? So sometimes, you know, when you compare research studies, you know, I think it's important to know that water holding capacity is a different metric than the actual moisture content at any given time in your orchard. And I would assume it depends on sort of like the timing and also how long that cover crop has been into place. I don't think you're going to significantly increase your water holding capacity in just 1 year after cover cropping. So I would expect that there's sort of like a time effect where maybe at first you might have a little bit of competition for water, and that after a while you improve your soil properties to the point where you might be doing better.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that ties a lot of these questions and the answers that Charlotte and Johnny have provided just ties things together very nicely is that the cover crop is probably doing the most to limit erosion and runoff during the rainy season. And then that's also when you're going to have the least worry about higher rates of evapotranspiration. And so you're getting some of those benefits in the winter with relatively low risk with respect to evapotranspiration. And then Charlotte, I will admit that I gotta like look through the right part of my glasses to be able to see that bit of the handout, but I believe that you mentioned mowing like in the spring. So you're getting the cover crop, then you could start having the benefits, some of the benefits from the organic matter of it being mowed, but not have that evaporative concern as it's really starting to warm up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Charlotte, thank you very much. And so this is open mic now. And the first question is, what type of drill did you use in the no-till cover crop area?
It was a Schmeiser seed drill. It's 4 foot wide. And I don't remember how many drills it has. I think it has 6.
I think 8.
8.
What's the cost to install a water system on 4 acres of property?
I don't have that number right in front of me. I could get it,
about
but I don't have that in
$10,000.
front of me.
Yeah, probably be about $10,000. So I'm going to go back and start asking some of these questions that we skipped over. Let's see. Side question, noticed your use of flex hosing. I had problems on my ranch using flex hose. Rodents and coyotes chew into them for water. Do you have these problems, or do you have a deterrent?
Dr. Hedrick likes to shoot them, but no. Yeah, I have experimented with rigid PVC as the risers coming out of the ground. I decided to use the flex hose in this particular block. I've been pretty happy with it, but we see rodents chewing on not just the flex hose, but the drip tube as well. So that's been an issue in the past. We have seen significant damage to our drip lines in certain areas. And that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago at the peak of the drought. And actually, Dr. Hedrick and Dr. Garner came up with the idea of putting little tubs of water at the ends of each row to actually have a water source for the rodents. And believe it or not, it really worked well to prevent those rodents from chewing on our irrigation system.
Yeah, to be clear, that was David's idea, and I'm the one that talked Johnny into giving it a try. And I still remember that he looked back and he said, "I can't believe it. I saw one of them drinking out of the tub of water, but it feels wrong to help the pest get some water." But we had like our student labor spending so much time fixing and replacing irrigation. And then once because we mainly had a squirrel an issue, and mainly tree squirrel issue, once they had a water supply, then we didn't have to spend so much money and time fixing an irrigation system.
Yeah, it was just giving them what they want, you know, and sometimes that works out, especially because that was the tail end of the drought, and you know, they were all hurting. And I had checked with the county on, because it was gray tree squirrel, and of course that's a fur-bearing mammal, and it's got some restrictions on take, and I checked with the county, and they were just like, no, we're not going to let you trap or do anything like that. So it was, you know, hands were tied. And so it was just a matter of, well, if that's water that they want, let's just give them to them in a way that's not going to, you know, be harmful to us. And sure enough, it worked.
Here's another berm question. Does berming reduce leaf litter due to wind?
Reduce leaf litter?
Correct.
I would think it would be the opposite. You might see more leaf litter being lost on berms than
that's
flat.
The question. Yeah. Do you lose more on the berm than on flat ground?
I would assume so, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen that also on some completely flat avocado orchards near foothills. So I think the wind is like your biggest issue there, whether it's on berms or if you've got skirted up trees in a windy area, you're gonna lose leaf litter that way. Yeah, definitely. I agree with Johnny on that one.
Okay. Did you do any soil disinfestation to reduce Phytophthora before planting in this situation? Or did you want to? No, you wanted to have a lot of pressure. You know, I had a question for you, Lauren. You say one of the rootstocks reduced the perseamite population. How does that work?
Okay, I did not say that. We monitored. So what happened is we're in the orchard to do one of the data collections, and we noticed when we were at the north end of the block, we noticed what seemed to be a fair amount of perseamite damage on the leaves. And so we didn't know if that was a factor of how close that part of the block was to orchard that had a fair amount of perseamite pressure that year, or if there could possibly be a rootstock effect. And so it was actually not even the first senior project that came out of this study, out of this rootstock study, is that a student who had already taken entomology with Dr. Hedrick checked on all of the UC IPM work to know how to really spot perseamite damage, how to rate it, and then just scored all of the trees for perseamite damage. And there wasn't an effect related to how far the trees were from other mature blocks. There was one of the rootstock that had a higher perseamite damage, if I'm remembering that correctly. But then the issue and the reason we'd want to look for that is that some of the things that make the rootstocks different from one another could potentially confer something to the scion that may make them, more or less susceptible to certain pests or other diseases, or maybe more likely to potentially there might be flushing out at a slightly different time. So we're interested to learn more, but I know that Patty is also looking to see what other kinds of insect or pathogen pressure might potentially be affected by this different rootstock. So yeah, that's what we've got at the moment.
That's Patty Manasalva at UC Riverside Plant Pathology. So here's some suggestions coming from the crowd for squirrel control. I have found wrapping aluminum foil after the first chew seems to be a helpful deterrent, maybe. And then somebody else says, I've started using IBC totes with an auto water bowl and spread them over the grove, and that has reduced line damage so far. Not 100%, but way better. And my next step is to cut and use old drip line to cover the micro lines. That's a good idea. I once sprayed jalapeno juice in a black latex paint on lines, and that stopped coyote damage. So, you know, all kinds of crazy things out there. Are you sampling for root rot in the orchard, or are you just rating trees according to damage?
We have sampled once before. We sampled right before planting, but that time of year, Patty was telling us is just really not the best. It's so hot that it's not really the best time of year to sample for it. But we're going to be working with our colleagues from Riverside to sample on a regular basis for Phytophthora. So yes, that's one of the things we need to keep doing with the project, because like I mentioned, you don't really know how well you're assessing the resistance to Phytophthora if the trees never get challenged with it at all. So we still need to find out how heavy that pressure might actually be at the moment.
Yeah. This is for David Hedrick. What do you think of the UC IPM website for recommendations about thresholds and identifying pests of avocado? We lost David.
There we are. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'd say one of the things that the UC IPM, the pest management guidelines did a few years back that was strategically good was to go to the year-round approach to managing pests and diseases. And that really gives the growers that kind of big picture perspective. And it's such a huge help. And if you go on that particular one, because the old one is still there, so make sure you're going to the new one and get that year-round picture of what's going on. And you'll see the charts there that kind of walk you through January through December and what to do. And a lot of it is good, but remember that site has to serve as a general guideline for what is, 700 miles in latitude from San Diego to wherever, Chico. You can't cover all the bases for everybody. So you have to take it for what it is, a general guideline. And that is where some of this stuff, like what we're doing here and what we do on campus, is teaching and training how to validate what you're seeing on those recommendations. Validate them for your area. And so if there's a degree day model, get out there and validate that. Just use some sort of biological marker, a biofix, and see how it adds up. There's ways to do that. The other thing about the current IPM guidelines for avocados is the way they've broken up the pests. And I really like that, because you've got the ones that are most significant concern. Then you've got the secondary ones that, it's like, well, we talked about it already. We don't have Polyphica shothole borer here. We don't have lacebug here. We don't have the neohydatothrips here. So we have to look at that from the perspective of, okay, what's the most important and what do we have? So that is a really good way to get people to kind of filter and recognize what are they going to be their real significant concerns.
Yeah. Okay, well, there were a whole bunch of pruning questions in there that disappeared. I wonder if Gabe and Blake answered them. They disappeared. I don't know. But
Yeah, I've been answering them.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end here, and this is all going to be on the Avocado Society website, along with the chat questions and answers. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone. And Claire Balint, do you have anything to say?
I have one more thing to add, which is that Dr. Nick Babin here at Cal Poly is doing a survey of avocado growers. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now, right here. And I will send it to the attendees. He is conducting this survey to understand grower perceptions of risk and the barriers to adoption of conservation practices in California avocado orchards. He would like to use this, all answers will be anonymous. This voluntary survey will help inform policymakers and agricultural advisors on farmer perceptions of risk and conservation practices. I will post that link also everywhere the recording is, but on behalf of Dr. Babin, we'd really appreciate if you would fill out this survey at your leisure. Thank you.
So thank you all. Enjoy your avocados.
And thank you, everyone. Great seminar.